Hello and welcome to World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. Coming up on the program, the BRICS nations command a large portion of the world's population, land area, and GDP. But can this organization be more than just a talk shop? As China's high school students take the Gaokao exam, is this standardized test too rigid for its own good? And we start today's show with BRICS. This year, China took over the BRICS presidency and will host the 9th BRICS Summit in September in Xiamen, Fujian Province, Southeast China. On Wednesday, 25 media groups and 5 countries gathered together in Beijing for a media forum, an important warm-up for the big event in 3 months. Although an end of the BRICS era has been hinted by many in recent years, the 5 economies are determined, it seems, to step up their cooperation. Take a look at this.
An economic concept in 2001, uniting 5 countries in a formal association. For Jim O'Neill, the economist who dreamt up BRIC, the combined potential of 4 non-Western powers was significant to the world. With South Africa joining the original BRIC group in 2011, the group now makes up 42% of the world's population and 26% of the world's territory, with around 30% of the global GDP. They've also set up their own development bank, in parallel to the European-dominated IMF and the US-dominated World Bank.
BRICS is not a bloc, it's an association of countries which have common interests and common views, and which can exchange experience in the economic and the social area. Yesterday I was trying to sell to the BRICS Bank, which was created in 2014, another big milestone.
Top leaders from the 5 members meet every year, and this year China takes over presidency. The 9th BRICS Summit will be held in Southeast China in September, while the first think tank forum, which was held in late May in Shanghai, was about strengthening regional cooperation.
The reason we choose the topic, the sub-regional, is because the other 4 BRICS countries, they are the leading economy in their local regional group. And we hope that we can use the cooperation with the 4 BRICS countries to build the pivot country and build the bridge with them, and also attract their neighboring countries together to include them into our international development programs.
But there are concerns that some of the 5 nations are no longer the shining emerging economies they used to be. While optimists believe that struggling growth is drawing them closer for further win-win cooperation. At least in the foreseeable future, their determination for closer ties will remain strong as a brick.
BRICS Summit, 100 days almost from now. So what is this group likely to do during the summit, and what about the warm-up period right now? Turn to our panel. We have from the 5 countries joining us, in fact, Zhang Jianping, coming from the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation in China. Joining us also in Beijing, Professor Alexander Lukin from the Moscow State Institute of International Relations from Russia. And also joining us in Beijing in the GNY studio, Charles Tang, who is from the Brazil-China Chamber of Commerce and Industry from Brazil. Coming from Taipei, originally from, of course, India, Madhav Nalapat from the International Relations Department of Manipal University in India. In London, and yet originally from South Africa, we have Stephen Gelb, former economic professor from the University of Johannesburg. Gentlemen, what a pleasure to have the 5 of you coming from 5 different BRICS countries. Wow, what a strong panel. Let me begin by asking you, though. BRICS is a phrase. It is artificially made, man-made. And yet, we see the 5 economies at very different stages now in terms of economic and political challenges. Is this a time for them to come together, or division is getting ever bigger? I want to start with Professor Lukin.
I think that there's a big mistake that some people do. Economic cooperation is not the main idea of BRICS. The BRICS that we see now is not the BRICS that was predicted by some economists before. Western economists. Because the real BRICS came not because these countries have something in common in the economy, but from originally from Russian-Chinese cooperation, then India joined this cooperation, then Brazil and South Africa. So it's more a geopolitical, I would say, project, and also it's a group which main aim is to change, or at least to alterate in their favor, the global government system. But economy, of course, they can do economic cooperation, but it's not the main idea.
Do you agree with that, Professor Nalapat from India? This is not what the BRICS is about. It should be politics. It should be geopolitics, as Professor Lukin said. Is it true?
Well, the fact is that, geopolitics and geoeconomics, they march together. And I would like to agree with the professor, because take, for example, India. Although India is very friendly with the Western countries, India has not at all agreed with the sanctions on Russia. In fact, India regards these sanctions as extremely unjustified, and it's frankly negative for the global economy. So India has not only not participated in sanctions, just a few days ago, Prime Minister Modi spent a considerable amount of time with President Putin at St. Petersburg. So the reality situation is the three biggest powers of Eurasia are in BRICS. The largest economy of Africa is in BRICS, and the largest country in Latin America is in BRICS. So this is indeed a very significant forum, and I again agree with my Russian friend that we need to move beyond economics into strategy and into other matters.
Okay. Well, Professor Go, coming from South Africa, what about that? Is it should be geopolitics, or should be economy, or actually should be an emergence of all of this? You see already different opinions being thrown around for this discussion already.
Well, I think the original motivation for the BRICS coming together as a group, beyond just the slogan that Jim O'Neill came up with, but coming together as an active group, was about geopolitics, and particularly around the shifting global balance of power around the time of the financial crisis, 2007, 8, 9, when the BRICS was started. And I think the countries in the BRICS, particularly China, of course, India and Brazil, saw the opportunity to join together to promote what was then their common interest in shifting the rules of the game, so to speak, in trade governance, in financial governance globally, to take account of economic realities, which are that these are big economies.
What about now?
But even back then, when
what about now? The
well,
question
you see,
is now.
even back then, so back then, when South Africa joined in 2011, my view was that for the BRICS to sustain itself, there would have to be increasing economic and trade investment linkages between the 5 countries to sustain it as a grouping, as their sort of very specific geopolitical interests began to fall apart or diverge.
All right.
Not so much fall apart.
So we got three votes already. 1 for geopolitics, coming from Professor Lukin in Russia. 2 votes for more economic and also trade links, coming from South Africa and India. What about you? Your vote extremely important. Mr. Tang, coming from Brazil. Which side are you on?
I'm on the side that when the BRICS was formed as a political cooperation entity, there was a very valid reason for doing so. It was totally unfair that the 5 countries together, which hold a substantial amount of the population of the world and territory, really did not have a voice at all in the international financial system.
Okay, Mr. Tang, so please be direct with me, not diplomatic at all. You know, many of your friends here are sitting with us today. Which side are you on? Should it be about geopolitics, or should it be about economic and further links of trade?
I think that it should be both. I think that there is a very valid reason in geopolitics for the existence and the creation of BRICS, and I think that the trade links between the countries should be increased furthermore.
Okay, Your vote, cast your solemn vote, Mr. Zhang. Which side for you?
Of course, I will choose a more comprehensive understanding on BRICS.
What does that mean, comprehensive?
Including geopolitical cooperation, meanwhile, economic cooperation. Especially, I like to say that BRICS as a G5, actually, we will, on behalf of those developing economies and transition economies, in progress of regional governance and global governance, we can have our common sense, common language.
Wow. Professor Lukin, Mr. Zhang from China already bring out the word G5. Think about that. But to you, it's more geopolitics, even though we have different votes. But for this round, let me ask you, even about the geopolitics, even about international governance, has this group so far come up with any specific plans in terms of changing the governance of international community at this point?
I don't think any contradiction. I think all 5 votes were the same. We're also talking about the same thing.
You want to be with the majority, it sounds like.
No, it's not like that. It's what I said was that BRICS is not about, mostly not a bilateral cooperation between the members, but about changing the entire economic and political system of the world, a world
Point
governance.
taken. So what about that?
So,
changing the system, governance, international.
They have achieved something. For example, first, we can agree with our Chinese colleague about G5. In a way, it's a G5 because it's a kind of counterweight to G7 in the group of 20. In the G20, so like G7 represents the developed world, and G5 or BRICS represents the growing economies. So, the first push was trying to change the existing institutions, World Bank, and others.
But it has been done to certain. The financial crisis, because everybody think about changing, even the developed economies. But what about now? This is the test, the real test.
Well, the BRICS countries met with a very strong attack from the Western world, from the people, from the countries who didn't want to change anything. So they had to come to invent their own institutions to counterbalance those.
That was the initial. What about now? That is the question I have for now. What about now? Any change of international governance that's likely to happen for the recent years?
It has been partly changed because there are they have more say and more votes there, but also they are trying to create their own institutions.
Professor Gao, something.
Well, I think the world is at a different place now than it was 8 or 9 years ago. And it's at a very much more unstable place with a new US president who's somewhat unpredictable, let's say, changing the sort of global dynamics. And so the question, I think that the challenge really that faces the BRICS now is, can they speak with a single voice?
What do you think the answer is?
Well, I think it's going to be very difficult. I think that it's not clear that the interests of the different BRICS countries right now are all that well aligned.
Let's talk about
a sort of common theme.
Let's talk about some of these differences, if we can. Cooperation, the CEC, has always been a theme accompanying the BRICS countries from the very birth of the BRICS itself. Mr. Zhang, for example, China-Russia. China has the Belt and Road Initiative. Many of the Central Asian countries also part of it. And Russia has this Eurasian Economic Corridor. And you establish the Eurasian economic unity in a way. And many of the countries are overlapping. So is this competition or this cooperation? Mr. Zhang?
Yeah.
Don't be diplomatic, just say it directly.
Yeah. Different economies have different problems. You know that in China, we have so a lot of manufacturing sectors. But in Russia, they mainly focusing on resources sectors. They suffer from resources crises. So I think that the Belt and Road Initiative provide a new platform on which Russia, China, India, all of those countries can connect each other, promote infrastructure connectivities. We can promote, explore trade and investment opportunities. Let me give you a number. That is, today the trade volume between China and Russia only 70 billion US dollars. Between China and India, 60 billion US dollars. Between China and Brazil, 70 billion US dollars. So this type of level cannot catch up with trade volume between China and Vietnam.
What is that?
More than 110 billion US dollars. So that means,
Not even South Korea.
of course,
China.
between China and South Korea,
And China, United
300
States.
billion US dollars. China, US, 600 billion
Okay,
US dollars.
after that number, Professor Lukin, what do you think?
Well, the idea of BRICS is not that all their interests are the same, because it's not an international organization, it's not an alliance,
No,
it's
not
just
yet.
it's just a group. But they have some major interests which they have in common, and this interest is to change the international system of world governance, the international financial institutions, and also in a way world politics in general.
Yeah.
From that point of view, they have this. Like part of their interests are in common, and that's what brings them together, and that's enough for close cooperation, I would say.
What do you think, Professor Nalapat? China, India certainly have some issues in terms of territory and some of the latest development, but what do you think? Is that going to be competition or cooperation?
Well, the fact of the matter is that China and India have a lot more to cooperate about than they have to, for these kind of differences. The differences are far smaller in number than the elements of cooperation. Now, reality is taking the world, in my view, in a direction which is favorable to the BRICS and not very favorable to the Western countries. Take, for example, the United States. I mean, it does 3 times more trading with Asia than with Europe. So there is now a situation in which after 50 or 55 years of the Atlantic century, we are now entering into an Indo-Pacific century. And in this Indo-Pacific century, quite frankly, whether it's India, whether it's China, whether it's Russia, these 3 BRICS countries are very, very important. So far as Brazil is concerned, Brazil is not going to be cheated of its destiny as one of the big economies of the world. So far as Russia is concerned, I mean, it's only a matter of time before Russia resumes its status as one of the top global powers. It has all the potential, human and resources for that. So the fact is, geopolitical currents, geopolitical facts are leaning in the way of BRICS.
Yeah. At this point, I did hear a lot of words like potential, and potential from you, Professor Nalapat. That means we have to figure out a way to achieve these potential. Talking about the way to achieve the potential, the best way is to figure out what the realities are. Some members right now of the BRICS are not necessarily the economic powerhouses yet, or compared to what they used to be. The economies of Brazil, for example, of Russia shrank last year as a result of different geopolitics and also energy prices, while South Africa was also a country that's suffering from some political challenges as well. China, India still growing at a very steady pace, and some suggest the number is quite impressive. So the question is, let me go to you, Mr. Tang from Brazil. With this very unbalanced growth rate and economic realities, are these countries still thinking similarly than they used to be, which was right after the financial crisis?
Well, I don't really think that these countries all thought similarly, except for the fact that when they were created, when BRICS was created, the debtor nations controlled the world economic system, and the creditor nations, the largest creditor nations in the world, had no say and no voice in the governance of the international monetary and financial system. And that was one of the main reasons why they were created. Now, having said that, Brazil is going through a crisis. We see it all the time. But Brazil will come out much stronger as a result of the fight against corruption. For the first time in the history of the country, the rich, the powerful, and the powerful politicians are going to jail. And just like in China, this fight against corruption will make a stronger country, will result in a stronger country. And the reasons for having the BRICS formed in the first place have changed completely. The global leadership and the global governance has been changed. The new investment bank from the BRICS, the AIIB, the RCEP in place of TPP, the withdrawal of the United States from the Paris Climate Agreement, etc. And of course the Road and Bridge Initiative, which will transform the world in such a dynamic way. So history will remember President Xi Jinping as the Chinese president who will consolidate the leadership role of China in the world. So the reasons why the BRICS were created, not all of them still exist. The world has changed.
It is evolving. It is evolving. Great point there. I want to ask you, Mr. Zhang, as a result, there is a lack of leadership in the world these days. Let's just admit about that, particularly after the US election and the recent chaos in the European economy. So, will the BRICS countries as a whole be able to play this role of moral leadership? The world is in need of leadership, as we all know, if we want to move together toward one potential. Is it strong enough, big enough, and also convincing enough to the others?
I think that if you look at economic performance, actually China and India already becomes two very important driving forces for global economic growth.
That's economic growth. I'm talking about moral leadership here.
On the other hand, if you look at BRICS cooperation mechanism, that means 5 big countries, influential economies, they already work together, sitting together to discuss how to promote regional governance, global governance. In this regard, I do believe that their political influence, as well as economic influence, gradually will be expanded. And of course, it will take time for them to play real, leadership in a global society. But every country has their domestic problems and difficulties.
Okay, Professor Gao, but very briefly from you.
Well, I think that it's wrong to sort of look at this group as a single group and expect that they're going to play that role of leadership, whether it be morally, politically, because they are coming from very different places. There are problems in Brazil. There's problems with the way Russia is seen, rightly or wrongly, around the world. And certainly from a South African point of view, I think South Africa's moral authority, both within Africa and more broadly, has taken a very severe knock in the last 2-3 years, and I think will continue to because of domestic events. So, I think China's in a very different place, India to a considerable extent as well. China and India, lesser so, have the economic clout where their positions globally have to be taken very, very seriously. But the other three, I'm not so sure about at this moment.
Yeah, Professor, looking very briefly from you, what do you think about that? As a whole, can they play a moral leadership, or actually only certain members in this specific grouping are more impressive to the rest of the world?
Frankly, we don't feel lack of leadership in Russia. Maybe we even have
I'm not talking about Russia within yourself, but rather the world, the international community. That's what we're talking about.
Anyway, as I said, I think the moral leadership or leadership in the world is not the idea of the BRICS. It have a much more modest goal to get more voice, not to undermine the current system of global governments, because it will lead to stability, but just slowly make it to evolve to represent more the interests of non-Western world, of developing world, of the growing economies. And this modest goal, I think, can be achieved.
Before we go, I do want to ask some of you a very brief question, an important one. Professor Nalapat, briefly if you can, with your philosophical ideas. The problem among the BRICS countries is that there has been a lack of understanding if we look back in history. But rather we learn about one another through third parties, for example, Western media, American or British media. Is there danger about that? How much should we know each other now? Can we do that? Professor Nalapat, briefly from you, sir.
Well, I think more than a lack of understanding, it's frankly a lack of ambition. Now, in the case of BRICS, for example, I mean, something really bold, visa-free entry within the BRICS countries, or much greater freedom of trade between the countries. That the BRICS countries have been very careful and very, very slow and incremental in making progress. And I think it's time now in China, when the BRICS leaders meet, that they take some bigger leaps. I mean, Europe took bigger leaps, and that paid off for Europe.
Yeah.
So I think it's time for some more ambition on the part of the BRICS countries.
Ambition to know one another, ambition to act. That's what Professor Nalap has said. The final words from you, Mr. Zhang.
I think that BRICS summit is a very good platform and mechanism to promote mutual understanding. On the other hand, I hope that in the future, BRI also can play a role.
All right, we'll see what's going to happen. But for now, I'm so happy to be joined over the past 20 minutes by the 5 of you gentlemen coming from the 5 BRIC countries. Really appreciate it. Zhang Jianping, Alexander Luking, Matt Nalapat, and Stephen Go. But before the leaders talk, the 5 of you already brought up some wonderful ideas. Really appreciate it, gentlemen. Thank you so much. You're watching World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you live from CGTN here in Beijing. Still to come on our program. For decades, the Chinese Gaokao exam ensured that even the poorest students could shine. But as high schoolers begin this year's test, how can it be improved? Many ask that question. Welcome back. You're watching World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you live here in Beijing. Today is the first day of China's annual college entrance examination, the Gaokao. Look at that young guy over there. He is there to participate. This year marks the 40th anniversary of the result. Is regarded by many Chinese students as their best shot at a bright future. Take a look as to what to learn about this event.
Time for the Gaokao again. The city is busy today. Police cars and ambulances are stationed outside the test centers to ensure security, and in emergency, parents wait outside with anxiety. Today, a total of 9.4 million people in China have begun taking the Gaokao, the annual national college entrance examination. The exam will last 2 or 3 days in different regions across the country.
The Gaokao is extremely important. It is one's first step in pursuit of a professional career.
In China, especially in the past 40 years, Gaokao has been regarded as a very important event that has changed the fate of several generations. This is significant to China's large population. For a long time, it was taken as a fair way to select talent. However, with rapid development, the admission rate has increased, and the Gaokao is not the only way for Chinese students to enter college. Nowadays, some of them choose to study overseas, join the autonomous enrollment, or study at technical schools.
And I think that I did questions, but Gaokao, they neglect the activities or like your personality, but only the grades. So I think that like going abroad, they may respect me in this case.
Although there has been criticism of the system, we can't deny that under this system, Chinese students have developed a strong grasp of science and math. In the meantime, there is room for Chinese students to fix shortcomings in their comprehensive ability. To pave the way for future generations, China has been seeking an optimal system of education.
For more discussion on China's college entrance exam, or Gaokao, we are joined here in Beijing studio, Ms. Wang Yan from the National Institute of Education and Science of China. Welcome, ma'am. In Beijing as well, David Moser, Academic Director at the Capital Normal University. He's here bringing a lot of American students to China.
That's right.
Joining us in Hong Kong, we have Professor Li Jun from the University of Hong Kong. Welcome to the three of you. I'm sure the 2 Chinese guests have already taken the Gaokao exam. That's why you could be where you are today. But for David, you probably have a different experience.
Yes, I've just witnessed as a sympathetic viewer to the the people who have to
Yeah,
take
but
the
you
Gaokao.
also have SAT exams back in the United States, right?
That's right, and we studied for them very hard also, and there was a lot of pressure. However, the difference with the Gaokao and the SATs is even if I did badly on the SATs, I could probably get into some university somewhere, without a doubt.
But when it comes to jobs and when it comes to bios, it probably wouldn't sound as fascinating as a great university, so-called.
That's true. Right.
Yeah. So is that the same everywhere in the world?
Well, there is some study that has categorized the university admission schemes into 5 types.
Yeah.
So there is the one like United States, and there is the one like China, as the Gaokao is the only pathway to the university, and that's also regarded as most fair or most equitable system. But well, actually, comparing United States and China, the pilot reform what we're doing now is, I think, getting closer to United States, and students, even if they cannot succeed in the Gaokao, but they could get good performance in the something called Students Learning Performance Examination. So when they
Another exam.
So in the future, they will combine or integrate their scores in these 2 examinations.
Before we go to this very complicated reform, Chinese education system has always been enjoying over the past few decades, some successful, some not necessarily. So let's talk about exactly what this college entrance examination is, the nature of it. Professor Li, I mean, for a basic college entrance exam, is its nature to cultivate the best talents of the country? Or its nature is to be as fair to everyone as possible who have reached a certain age and seeking further education and job opportunity in the country?
Thanks, Tim Wei. And this is a very good question. Thank you. I think for Gaokao itself, it means 2 things. One thing is how to select the most talented, brightest students get into universities for their further development and for the sake of the whole society. The second thing is about the fairness you mentioned. That's the educational equality, how this equality can be kept to a certain level, so that the young generation can move up.
But Professor, let's just be clear. One arrow shoots so many birds at the same time. I'm not just believing in that, what you have just said. On the one hand, select the best talents of the country. On the other hand, to be fair, as fairly as possible for anyone and open to everyone. Is it going to be achievable, both goals at the same time? Is it fair to ask too much for one exam?
That's right. Yeah, it's actually a dilemma. It's very hard, and that's why Gaokao has been restored after the Cultural Revolution to achieve excellence. To select the brightest students. And on the other hand, it's very, very difficult to keep that fair to everybody. In terms of the Gaokao itself, it's fine. It's equal to everybody who participated.
Yeah.
But there is some unequal background information behind this selection process. For example, family background. Some students enjoy much more resources. Their family can afford to provide more resources for them,
Let me ask
but not all.
Okay.
So that's the dilemma.
I don't know what you refer to, but Professor Li, as you may know, coming from a well-educated family background, you usually have more access in any country toward the educational system. That is just a matter of fact. I don't know exactly what you refer to, but let's have Ms. Wang to respond to that. Does family matter in this regard?
Well, in China, as I said, China's Gaokao system is regarded as one of the most fair in the world, and it provides or secure a pretty high degree of fairness of the education opportunities. Especially last year, recently, the government has a new policy to allocate more quota to the underdeveloped regions, and but well, after all, everywhere in the world, social capital do play a role, but
play a role in any society.
Yeah, but it
just
depends
to be fair
on
here.
how much the central governments can make interventions to make the system more actable. I think China is doing well in this regard.
We'll see what's going to happen. Since 1990s, just to be fair, we take some numbers in this. Chinese government started to call for Gaokao reform. One of the attempts was to increase the enrollment rate. In other words, everyone has better opportunity to go to the universities. Back in 1977, gross enrollment rate in China, number of college students among all young people aged between 18 and 22, barely 4.8%, less than 5. So 2016, this ratio jumped around 40%. Enlargement in college enrollment created problems as well, because more people got into universities, more people tried to find jobs, and yet the jobs number did not necessarily match with the enlargement of the enrollment in the universities. So, David, here's the thing. Two things. One is, what is the nature of Gaokao? Should we ask too much about one system to let it produce everything we want? Secondly, enlargement, does that mean fairness?
Okay, well, first of all, one of the problems with the Gaokao is that, yes, it's very fair, but that it tends to select students who are very good at taking tests. And that means two things. It means that there are certain kinds of students who are good at studying for tests and are good for acquiring and spitting out that kind of knowledge. Yeah. It also means the tests can only cover certain kinds of knowledge that are able to be put on a multiple choice question, for example.
Do you have alternatives to the question?
No, I don't, but that's one of the problems. The other problem you talked about, increased participation. That's true. There's now more people that are able to take the test and to get into college. The problem now is that China needs a more diverse job employment market. People who have different skills, who have skills that aren't approachable with the Gaokao. Right. So those are the two problems with the Gaokao right now. There's nothing wrong with the test if you want to pick out those particular STEM course kinds of talents, but if you want all-around talents, the Gaokao probably will never be a good test for that.
Well, should it be expected as the best test for everything?
Well, I think it could not. It's not possible. And now the overall reform direction is kind of like a reconcile the fairness with efficiency. And the new pilot reform scheme or Gaokao scheme is to allow students to select 3 subjects out of 6 or 7 that they think they prefer or more suits with their talents or career development
orientation. Well, of course, during this process, the fairness thing has become such a big issue because Gaokao is supposed to be relatively fair. The problem is the fairest system so far in China. When you put reform over there, make sure the fairness issue is the top priority. Otherwise, we lose the whole credibility of the Gaokao system. Having said that, though, too many people still rely on Gaokao anymore, particularly those that have more social capital, as you mentioned earlier. So many Chinese students. Yeah. When they get to high school, they're already enrolled in a very different program. They go and taste the SAT, they go to Australia, the United Kingdom, and some of the other countries as well. So Gaokao, is that still the system to churn out the best Chinese students, or actually the best Chinese students shy away from it already?
Well, the problem with, a lot of parents want to avoid the Gaokao because they feel the Chinese educational system is too stifling, it's too limited, it limits creativity, and so they send their kids overseas or they do other options within China. The problem is, from the educator's standpoint, is that the only class that can really take advantage of these possibilities are the upper middle class or the upper class, the rich, the aristocrats, or the so-called Fuerdai and so on. Yes. So yes, there are all these. The educational system is expanding and opening up, but only to that upper class go overseas. So for most of the people in the lower middle class, they're stuck with the Gaokao. There's no other option for them. Basically.
Really, is that true, Professor Li?
Well, yes, I think I agree, David's point, and I think, of course, for some families, especially for some middle classes, they want to send their kids to overseas for study. Mainly, I think one thing is they can like do jing in Chinese. You earn something very special and valuable, which you cannot earn from Chinese universities.
Like a status,
so
in a way.
That's the one point. That's a motivation for them. The other motivation is that they can learn something different and learn how to respect diversity in other countries. If they continue their learning in China, maybe they cannot develop that kind of perspective. So that's also very valuable, especially in the age of globalization.
Right, but is that true, or is that misperception, or that is only true in certain universities if these students go to, not necessarily true in other universities, because we all know there are different kinds of universities around the world. Even though there are foreign universities, does not necessarily mean they're better. Ms. Wang, very briefly, got 40 seconds for you.
Well, actually, if we look at one step further, and we will see pros and cons of going abroad. Many graduates, even graduates from very prestigious university abroad, still have difficulty or challenge in finding a job at home, and also
not to mention in the country that they study in.
Yeah, and also back at home. So. And the students who graduate from the domestic universities sometimes have more opportunities because of the social connections and also internship opportunities, etc. And also the quality education.
Your point is the quality of education?
I think it's advancing in China, higher education.
Well, we'll see. Thank you so much. Every time this year, every time when it comes to this day of college exam, we debate about the system. But it seems there's no better alternative so far. That's why we continue to talk about it every year. But for now, all the best to the students taking the exam. Thank you so much. Wang Yan, David Moser, Li Jun, really appreciate it. That's all the time we have for today. Try to find us, World Insight CGTN, in your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight with Tian Wei team. Thanks for watching. Tune in again tomorrow for more insights across China and around the world. Good night.